The morning sun over the forward operating base in the Hailan province was already a brutal, unforgiving white by 0700 hours. It was the kind of heat that didn't just warm you, it pressed down on you, a physical weight that made the air shimmer and dance above the gravel. For the men of SEAL Team 3, it was just another day in the grinding reality of their deployment. They huddled in the fragmentary shade of a concrete T-wall, their laughter coarse and loud as they geared up for a patrol. In the center of their attention stood a woman. Her name was Cora James, and she was an anomaly in this world of beards, cigarettes, and black talc. She was slight, with a lean, wiry frame that looked more suited to a cross-country runner than a battlefield. Her sandy blonde hair was pulled back into a severe regulation bun, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on the team leader, Commander Marcus Rock Stanton. Stanton, a mountain of a man from Montana with a chest like a barrel and a voice that could carry over a firefight, was reading out her name from a clipboard with a smirk. "James, see attached from DIA for specialized overwatch," he quoted, making air quotes with his thick fingers. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her gear, which was immaculate but looked brand new. "Intel says we have a high-value target moving through the district center. We need eyes on." "So, they send us you." The other 5 SEALs, hulking figures with nicknames like Tiny and Moose, chuckled. They were polite enough, products of a professional military, but the skepticism was a palpable force. One of them, a wiry sniper named Mike Preacher Tolson, who was the team's designated marksman, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "You know which end the bullet comes out of, sweetheart?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the condescension of a master craftsman looking at a child playing with tools. Cora didn't flinch. She had spent her entire adult life dealing with this. She was a chief petty officer, an intelligence specialist, and a graduate of a program so black that even the SEALs didn't have the clearance to know it existed. She had spent the last 18 months not in Virginia Beach, but in a stifling room in Qatar, staring at drone feeds, building pattern-of-life analyses, and occasionally, when the situation demanded it, being strapped into the back of a Gulfstream to take the shot herself. "I can manage, Preacher," she said, her voice calm and devoid of the aggression they were used to. It was a voice used to giving orders in hushed tones, not shouting over the rotor wash of a Blackhawk. Stanton chuckled, a low rumble. "All right, James, here's the deal. We're moving on the deck. It's a snake-eater's world down there. You'll be in the hide with Preacher. Spot for him. You see anything, you tell him. He'll make the call. You just, observe. That's why they call it an observer mission, right?" The men laughed again. Observer. It was a soft job for a soft operator. They grabbed their rifles, checked their gear, and began the final ritual of psyching themselves up for the walk into the lion's den. Cora just nodded, slinging her own M4, a standard-issue carbine that looked lost against her frame. No one noticed the hard case she carried. It wasn't a rifle case. It was too short, too compact. It looked more like a case for a surveying tool or a high-end camera lens. The patrol left the wire, a column of heavily armed men moving with a fluid, predatory grace. Cora walked in the center, maintaining the pace, her eyes scanning the rooftops and windows, not with the nervous energy of a rookie, but with the cold calculation of a hunter. Preacher walked beside her, carrying his modified M110 semi-automatic sniper system. It was a beautiful weapon, capable of minute of angle accuracy out to 1,000 meters. "You ever fired one of these?" Preacher asked, patting his rifle. "The recoil might knock you on your ass. My ex-wife fired it once, bruised her shoulder for a week. She's a real estate agent now." He grinned, expecting a reaction. "I've fired a few," Cora replied, her eyes never stopping their sweep. They reached the designated hide. A bombed-out apartment on the 4th floor of a building overlooking the main thoroughfare. The room was choked with dust and shattered concrete. While the SEALs secured the perimeter, Preacher set up his spot on a collapsed wall, laying out his mat, his range card, and his spotting scope. Cora moved past him to the far corner of the room. She unzipped her hard case. Preacher glanced over, curious. "What you got there? A pair of fancy binoculars?" He saw her lift the components from the foam interior. It wasn't a camera. It was a rifle, but unlike any he'd ever seen carried in combat. It was a custom bolt-action precision rifle, the stock painted in a digital camouflage pattern, the barrel heavy and fluted. The scope mounted on top was a massive piece of German engineering, at least 10 times magnification. And it was a weapon designed for one purpose only: to end a life from so far away the target would never hear the sound of their own death. "Damn," Preacher whispered, his bravado momentarily gone. That's a 1,000-yard gun. You actually qualified on that?" Cora ignored him, moving to the window. She didn't just look out. She felt the space. She calculated the wind by the dust devils swirling in the street below, the mirage effect from the heat rising off the asphalt, the angle of the sun. She dialed adjustments into her scope, the clicks of the turrets the only sound in the room. Stanton and the other men had gathered in the doorway, watching this quiet spectacle. "Listen up," Stanton said, his voice losing its patronizing edge and replacing it with command. "HVTs are 2 blocks north, moving south in a white truck. ETA 5 minutes. Preacher, you have the primary. James, you back him up." "Roger that," Preacher said, settling behind his scope. I got the street corner. I'll drop the driver, then we'll have a shooting gallery." Cora didn't respond. She had moved to a different window, one that offered a different angle. She was muttering to herself, doing ballistic calculations in her head. Wind, 7 miles per hour from the west-northwest. Target speed, 20 miles per hour. Range to intercept point, 1,470 meters. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The radio crackled. "White truck moving south. It just passed the mosque." It's speeding up." Preacher tracked it in his scope. "I got him. I got the driver. Wait, there's a second truck, a black SUV, moving up fast from the rear. It's blocking my shot. I can't see the driver of the white truck now." Panic, controlled but present, edged into his voice. The target was slipping away. In a few seconds, the truck would be past the choke point and into a crowded market where engaging was impossible. The entire mission was about to fail. "But I can't get the shot," Preacher yelled. "He's boxed in." "Stand down," Stanton barked into the radio, the bitter taste of failure already in his mouth. "All units, stand. Contact." The word was so soft, so calm, it barely registered. It was Cora. She was no longer looking through her scope. She was just still. Her breathing had slowed to almost nothing. Her right eye was open, aimed at the window, but she wasn't seeing the room anymore. She was seeing the wind, the bullet's arc, the target. "What are you doing?" Stanton snarled. "I said stand down." She didn't hear him. Her finger, resting on the trigger guard, moved to the trigger. The world contracted to a single point. It wasn't about the man in the truck. It was about the space between her and him. It was a problem of physics, and she was the solution. Exhale, pause, squeeze. The crack of the rifle was deafening in the confined space, a thunderclap that made the men flinch. And the sound echoed off the concrete walls, a sharp contrast to the deeper boom of Preacher's gas-operated M110. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. Stanton looked at Cora, then out the window, then back at her. His face was a mask of fury. "What the hell? You just fired without authorization. You just blew our cover and killed some civilian, probably. You're the sniper? You're a loose cannon. You're gonna get us all killed." Preacher was still staring through his scope, his mouth agape. But his face had gone pale under his tan. He reached out a shaky hand and pointed. "Rock. Get on the scope. Now." Stanton shoved him aside and pressed his eye to the rubber cup. he scanned the street. The white truck was swerving, but not because of the driver. The driver was slumped over the wheel, his head a crimson mess. The truck jumped a curb and slammed into a wall, coming to a sudden, grinding halt. And then he saw it. The black SUV that had been blocking Preacher's shot. It had stopped too. The passenger side window was a starburst of shattered glass. Through the hole, he could see the passenger, the HVT they had been hunting. The man who was supposed to be protected by the armor of the SUV was also slumped over, motionless. "What the hell?" Stanton breathed, the anger in his voice replaced by a hollow confusion. "How?" "The shot," Preacher whispered, his voice filled with the reverence of a man witnessing a miracle. "Rock, look at the range." She didn't shoot the driver of the truck. The truck was a decoy. She shot the passenger in the follow car. She shot through the glass, through the turbulence, at a moving target. The distance... He trailed off. Cora, who had already broken down her rifle and was placing it back in the case, answered the question he couldn't finish. 1,473 meters. The wind was gusting, so I held for a meter to the right. The glass was ballistic, level IIIA. It slowed the round, but it didn't change its path. I aimed for the mastoid process. It's a small target, about the size of a silver dollar. The bullet fragments from the glass probably helped. She stood up, the case in her hand, her expression as neutral as it had been when she walked in. The room was dead silent. The SEALs, the men who had mocked her, who had called her a liability, stared at her as if she had just performed black magic. The silence was heavier than the heat, more oppressive than any enemy fire. Stanton finally straightened up, his face a mixture of awe, shame, and profound respect. He looked at her, this quiet, unassuming woman who had just done the impossible. He looked at his own team, men who were legends in their own minds, who were now rendered speechless by a support asset. He opened his mouth to speak, to apologize, to congratulate, to say anything that would bridge the chasm of his own arrogance. But before he could utter a single word, the silence was broken. It was broken by the sound of her rifle case clicking shut. It was a small, final, and utterly definitive sound. It was a sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of a point proven, of a question answered, of a legend quietly being born. Commander Marcus Stanton, the man who had laughed at her, stood frozen, his words dead in his throat, silenced not by an order, but by the profound, echoing quiet that followed her impossible shot.